government is to provide for the common good of the people and protect their national and international rights of the citizens of the state. This role of the government is extremely important to stability, well-being, and success within any specific country or state, as it provides for the common good of the people, protection and well-being, not entertainment and unsubstantial views of imagination. And because that is the role of the private sector. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the debate today. Throughout this debate, Team Proposition will prove to you why it is essential to stop the public funding of space exploration, and that any denial to this claim is a hindrance to the total exploitation of space opportunities and a refusal to accept the blatant truth. Now, we would like to define public funding as using government money to support a program in space exploration as simply going into space. Now, we will prove this argument to you in the following two main points. First, money is better spent in other programs. And secondly, private funding is better than public funding. I will go into my first 2 points, then my second speaker will provide extensions to these 2 points so that we can make it very clear why we must have must not have governmental funding of this. So we will prove to you the burden that private space exploration is the most beneficial way to exploit space as a whole and provide the global community with the most amount of benefits. Up and down the bench, we will prove to you why this case will in fact stand. So with that, I will enter my first point, which is the money is better spent in other programs, specifically entitlement programs. A mismanaged space program wastes money, talent, and time. Countries have immediate needs, and specifically in poverty, that need to be addressed. When we see these governments that have these needs, that are being ignored for space exploration, we have an immediate, pressing, and extremely dangerous problem. So we can see that entitlement programs are make or break programs. There are no second chances. When government money runs out, the programs are simply expended, and they are no longer allowed to exist, and they will not, in fact, continue. Currently, they also have unique dangers. And in a situation where countries are pursuing space, even though they have a huge income gap, and pursuing space when they have even larger, more pressing problems that space is not, in fact, solving. So we see that it creates a negative trade-off. So we're going to look at a few examples today between China, India, and Uganda. I'll take care of China, and then my second speaker will enter the other two and further extend this argument. So let's look at China. China has one of the largest growing space programs in our world today, and they expend a lot of money on this space program. In 2005, they budgeted about $1.2 million for space. However, people living in China currently have 13.14% of people living below the poverty line. So they are ignoring these people, which in China, with such a large population, is a substantial amount of people. And because space has discretionary funds, it takes away from other aspects of social society. So let's take a look at this. Within a government and within an economy, we have discretionary funds and we have compulsory funds. Now, space exploration is in the category of discretionary funds. Other examples of things that lie in this category of discretionary funds are urban housing, better infrastructure, and space and other allocated funds. So we see that when we put space program and put this into the budget within these other discretionary funds, we are taking away from these extremely important and pressing problems that China has and not allowing us to address these problems that are in the current situation of the world. It is a direct loss of wherever it is going, and this is extremely bad and negative. So the impact of this is that the major social problems lined with the discretionary funds of space are being ignored, and this is harming society. Another aspect of society of China that needs a lot of attention is their environmental health. We see that in China, only 1/3 of the 340 Chinese cities meet pollution standards, and only 1% of China's 560 million city dwellers breathe air by the European standards that would be proposed as safe, and that's according to the World Health Organization study. So we see that they have a huge environmental problem, but instead of addressing these problems that would allow mothers to sleep at night, knowing that their children would not be given lung cancer, would not be affected by these environmental troubles, and the Chinese government is instead going to space and not addressing these problems that are currently harming their society. And this is an extremely large problem, yes.
Can you show us exactly how all these problems you mentioned are attributed solely to space exploration as you're so forthcoming?
As I explained with the discretionary funds and with the compulsory funds, when we have these problems that could be fixed by allocating the money to the other places, but instead we're spending millions and millions and billions, in fact, of dollars on space exploration, we are denying the ability for these problems to be solved because the money is going to useless places such as space exploration. So let's take a look at our second argument now, which is that the private funding is better than public funding. So public funding is a roller coaster that cannot be predicted because of the fluctuation in economy. So if we look at the citizens within a government, we see that citizens are wanting short-term benefits. They're not willing to wait for the long-term benefits because they require short-term benefits so that they can see the success where their money is going. We see this in the Human Genome Project, which had public funding, and it was constantly taken in and out of commission because the public funding was fluctuating based on the economy and because the public was fluctuating its views based on the results that it was seeing. So we see that the people that were in fact working on the Human Genome Project had to change fields because in fact the project was fluctuating so much. Another example that we see that shows why private funding is in fact better than public funding is through a study done by the Washington Emory University. They took into account the Arctic explorations, and they saw that all of the private funding explorations were in fact successful. However, the public funding explorations were not successful at all. And we see this because the public fundings lost support for their projects throughout the progress and did not allow for the project to stay in commission for a long enough amount of time to make substantial benefits. So we see that this is why we must have the private funding rather than the public funding. Another reason why it is extremely important for private funding is that private funding will allow for an increase in the betterment of technologies. We as Team Proposition understand that many positive things come out of space exploration, and under no circumstances are we saying eliminate space explorations. But we are saying that if we allow these private companies to continue with space explorations, then we will cut out the great fluctuation that comes from public spending of space exploration, and we will allow competition among the private markets, which will improve the quality of the products that are in fact brought about by space exploration, and that will increase the ability in which these products are produced. Because what we see through public space exploration is exactly what we can see through private, but with more efficiency, with more control, and with better benefits in society. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it is not ethical, it is not true, and it is not right to deny the citizens of a country the rights to environmental health and the rights to food at night in poverty because of space exploration, and this is why we are proud to propose. Thank you.
Speech now call upon the first author to open a case for his side.
Do you guys have a phone? Not much.
You can use my telephone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the stance on side opposition? First of all, we're saying there's nothing wrong with status quo, ladies and gentlemen. We're advocating for status quo because, ladies and gentlemen, in the world right now, it's working. I want to prove to you why and how it's working later on in our speeches. But first, ladies and gentlemen, let me handle what the proposition said in today's debate. First, they brought us two lines of argument. That first of all, that money is better spent than other programs. Secondly, they argued privatization and why that is better than government, ladies and gentlemen. On the first argument, that space exploration takes away money from this. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, the argument that was brought to us by side proposition didn't actually show us how these problems will be solved once money is taken away from this. We assume that once money is taken away from these sections, ladies and gentlemen, a government like China will go away and feed the people. We forget, ladies and gentlemen, that a government like China does feed the people every day, ladies and gentlemen. It does give them staple food, ladies and gentlemen. It does not give them the standards of the first world, but it does feed them. Not to say, ladies and gentlemen, that once money is taken away from these discretionary funds, as you say, ladies and gentlemen, it will be taken to the environment and it will be taken to feeding the people, ladies and gentlemen, because that's how China works. It doesn't think like other countries, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, the proposition doesn't look at the bigger picture. What is the purpose of space exploration? The purpose of space exploration is not having fun and going out in space and having a party at the moon, ladies and gentlemen. The purpose of space exploration is to look for the future. What the proposition is arguing is the Zeigarnik effect, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that I'm hungry now, right, and I'm going to eat now, but I'm not looking for the future. I'm not saving towards the future. And that is the problem in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. Thus far, we've seen space exploration helping the world in so many ways, ladies and gentlemen. In our well-being, ladies and gentlemen, it has helped us. In our protection against in war, ladies and gentlemen, and armaments, it has helped us. It has helped us in communication. I will prove this to you, ladies and gentlemen, and show you how life would be without space exploration and how life is going to be without space exploration being funded by the government, ladies and gentlemen. Furthermore, because we took the stance of status quo, ladies and gentlemen, it is not only government in some countries that do space exploration. Like in America and their country, ladies and gentlemen, we've seen DARPA and other companies helping the United States, ladies and gentlemen, government. So what they're arguing right now is an existing thing, ladies and gentlemen. And furthermore, they should try and change their policy because it doesn't work. Furthermore, we'll prove to you why our stance is better in terms of the status quo and two of those sectors, the private sector and government working together. The second stance of argument that was brought to us by side proposition was that, okay, private funding is better. Ladies and gentlemen, I've already dealt with that because it's status quo. They should bring a new argument in today's debate. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, they argue the fact that, okay, there's no public interest and the interest doesn't really want this, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first of all, when Obama said that he's going to take away the NASA project, ladies and gentlemen, there was a rout, ladies and gentlemen. Around the whole country, people were complaining, why are you doing this, ladies and gentlemen? People see the benefits of the future. They're not blinded by what we need now, ladies and gentlemen. They can see to the future, ladies and gentlemen. And people, so basically, there is public interest and people want this, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why that point falls flat. She argued competition, ladies and gentlemen. That point is actually wrong. Space exploration in terms is actually really expensive. There won't be competition, ladies and gentlemen. What you're going to have is an oligopoly of rich companies, ladies and gentlemen, that have a hold on the market, ladies and gentlemen. I'll prove to you why that point actually falls flat in our points, ladies and gentlemen. Furthermore, this is our case split. I'll be proving the legitimacy of using public funds, ladies and gentlemen. Then I'll be advancing the argument of technological determinism, and I'll tell you what that is. Our second speaker will give with the benefits of the space exploration and show you why, when they work together, as in the private sector and the government, ladies and gentlemen, it actually works best and not in their way. Legitimacy of using public funds. What is the purpose of public funds, ladies and gentlemen, and when should we use public funds? I'll be proving those two things. First of all, what is the purpose? Government uses public funds, ladies and gentlemen, to benefit the public. And I'm going to use their own criteria on them, showing that, okay, they said that government funds should be used for public safety, right, well-being. I forgot the third one, ladies and gentlemen, but it's probably going to beat it anyway. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the benefits that we've had from this, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we've had medicine that has been taken from space, ladies and gentlemen, and improved the well-being of our people, ladies and gentlemen. I'll take you now, right? Okay, let me just take you now.
Sir, the people that actually benefit from the technologies that come about from space exploration, those are products that are commercialized by the private industry. By taking out the
No, 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 no. Sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down. What you want to do by privatizing it, you're leaving it into intellectual property to those governments, to those companies, ladies and gentlemen. So what happens is they have intellectual property over it and they have ownership over that. So what they can do is shoot high prices and sell whatever they want to sell at high price. Sit down. So what we want is for them to work together, right? When the government has it in its ownership, it can be directly used for public funds. If, for instance, Stopper says, I'm not going to go there, I'm going to sell it for about R1 million, ladies and gentlemen, people that really need it won't be able to use it. And that's why your argument is flawed. Carrying on. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, we've also had protection from this, ladies and gentlemen. We can have armament. I mean, the American government, ladies and gentlemen, does use research, ladies and gentlemen, and does use things from space that we've seen and that help the government, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of communication between the armies, ladies and gentlemen, and so forth. So what happens is there is protection in space exploration. There is well-being in space exploration because we can get medicine from that, ladies and gentlemen. We can find a bacteria on the moon, for instance, curing AIDS, ladies and gentlemen. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, when should we use public funds? We can only use public funds once it is to the benefit of everyone, and I want to prove to you why privatization doesn't work, ladies and gentlemen. Then secondly, if it is to the interest of the people. I already showed you why it hasn't to the interest of the people, because people want these benefits to come to them, ladies and gentlemen, right? In America, when Obama said, I'm going to shut it down, people were actually complaining about this. Public does want this. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, when should we use public funds? When it is beneficial, ladies and gentlemen, right? And yeah, when it is beneficial, ladies and gentlemen. So public funds can be used, ladies and gentlemen, when it's beneficial for everyone. And once it is in the hands of the government, ladies and gentlemen, it can be taken to everyone. So what they're proposing in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, is that there's an oligopoly in the system, ladies and gentlemen, where people can monopolize that argument, that those products that they find and sell it at a high price, or don't sell it at all, or use it to their own advantage and manipulate and exploit what we have in society, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to run technological determinism quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, what we see with them working together, and our second speaker will actually come to this, I'm only going to flash on this, ladies and gentlemen. If they work together, or if the government works alone, what we see, ladies and gentlemen, is that technology, please stop it, the technology, ladies and gentlemen, helps society develop, ladies and gentlemen, right? So when there's social problems in society, we can have, like for instance, communication that we found because of the internet, we found it in space, ladies and gentlemen. So we found, so because we have that, ladies and gentlemen, society can solve problems because of the technological advances that we have, right, ladies and gentlemen? And because okay, with that said, I've been the proposition already.
Okay, so I thank the first author of the speech and call upon the second governor to continue the proposition case.
When a nation can create a solution to poverty, hunger, and lack of health care, but instead chooses to invest in stargazing, we see a serious problem in the priorities of these nations. And we argue that there is a problem in the status quo and that there must be a change, and only Team Proposition is creating that change. Now, before I talk about why the opposition case is essentially flawed, let's talk a little bit about the role of the private sector and the role of the public sector. Now, the opposition is fundamentally misunderstanding the roles of these two sectors, and they haven't really addressed why it is the government's job to provide for space exploration. And let me explain that. It is the public sector's job to provide for safety and protection of the people and make sure that they can sustain for themselves, while it is the private sector's job to provide for innovation, profit, competition, and these corporations that are in the private sector will lead to more efficiency in the free market. So what we're arguing is there is this dangerous redundancy today in which both the private and public sector are both trying to achieve the same goal, and this is leading to inefficiency, which I will talk about as I explain why the opposition case is essentially flawed. Now, in response to our argument about money being better spent in entitlement programs, all they have argued is that we haven't shown how these problems will be solved. But in fact, we argue that in 2001, a researcher named Stephen Levitt proved that if Uganda gave all the money in the space program to entitlements, that they can cut poverty in half. When we see evidence like this, it is clear that this money is going to the wrong place. And furthermore, our first speaker already gave a justification to how discretionary spending works. Every dollar that is spent on the space program, on space exploration, is a dollar that is directly being traded off that could have been spent in social services, because they are both in the section of discretionary funds. So it is directly taking away from these programs. But moving on to their arguments about how we can use the public and private sector together, which I will also talk about later in my speech. But furthermore, we argue that it doesn't work because it's creating a barrier to entry for private corporations because they do not want to compete with the monopoly that the government has. And because the government is so big, they can create that barrier to entry. And furthermore, we see, we see that when organizations like NASA fail, we see that the private sector is actually coming up with like SpaceX, which is an organization, Space Adventures, and all these other corporations are coming and actually creating change. Yes?
The argument is flawed because we already showed you that in the past, DARPA has worked with the government successfully, and they've made projects that actually have worked. Prove that point to us.
Yes, because we argue that while one example may work, we see a bigger trend in the reason because we see that private corporations are not being able to step up because corporations like NASA have that monopoly. So while there may be some exceptions to the rule, we see that overall we see this trend in economics in which it is just simply not possible. But furthermore, they argue that intellectual property rights will be bad because we won't let the consumer get all these products because there'll be patents. We argue that this is simply not happening today because we see that in terms of like the GPS, which was created, which was spread out to different corporations, we see that they did not the intellectual property rights did not stop them from making GPSs more efficient and commercializing them, sending them out to the people. And we see that even if this is not, even if you still agree with the opposition on this argument, we see that the free market itself actually leads to efficiency. We see that at the end of the day, giving corporations the ability to compete in order to create the better products, in order to have better quality products, will in the end lead to better products for the consumer overall. But moving on to our own arguments. First, that money is better spent in entitlement programs. As up and down the bench so far, we have told you, there is a clear trade-off between spending money in space exploration and social services because of the specific budget that is allocated to discretionary spending as opposed to compulsory spending. And we have shown you that because this is directly affecting other funds, taking out space exploration will leave that money for social services. We argue that while some countries may be able to afford having space exploration programs, countries who are not able to afford it are still feeling obligated to expand their space programs. My teammate has talked to you a lot about China, but this is not just happening in China. It is happening in India, where there is large income gap inequality, 440 million people in poverty, and yet they are still investing in a probe to Mars, which will cost between $70 and $90 million. Could you tell me that that is moral?
Right, ma'am, you need to show us how from removing the spending from space exploration, it will go to those things, ma'am.
Yes, I have said this over and over, that there is, when you decide your federal budget, you say 50% goes to discretionary, 50% goes to compulsory, whatever it is. And in that, you can decide what goes to space exploration, what goes to social services. If you take away space exploration, which maybe takes up 50% of discretionary spending, that's 100%, that's 50% more that goes to social services. There is no more that I can explain it. They must respond to this. But furthermore, as I was talking about India, we have shown you that entitlement programs actually create change. No, thank you. No, thank you. For example, we see that in Uganda. We have shown you the example of how they can actually cut their poverty in half. But instead, they are just relying on international aid, including one called the Community-Driven Program, in which they sent $400 to a certain amount of people to each family, and they were able to take this money and develop new trades such as metalworking or tailoring, and we see that it actually increased their overall income by 50%. So we see that aid does actually work, but instead of Uganda relying on international aid, they should actually be spending the money that they are investing today in a space program and put that money into social services. So we see that the problem is that countries aren't prioritizing their money well when they are given the option, because they just are worried about their image in the international community. And because of this, they are creating a bad precedent, and the proposition is solving this problem. But moving on to why the private sector is better than the public sector in terms of space exploration. We argue that there is no consistency, because all this money is going to be in the hands at the whim of politicians who are only trying to get votes and further their reputation. And if the public is not impressed by long-term developments in space exploration, which may cost more money but not see immediate results, then maybe these will not actually be funded. And we see that these are what's actually important and what is actually helping science. So for example, we see in the American stem cell research program, it really depended who was in office about how much money they got. So we see that there were fluctuations in 1,300 jobs and over 200 grants and $200 million over the term of 20 years. So we see that this extreme fluctuation actually hurts the ability of the private of science programs to do what they are supposed to do. Furthermore, we argue that the public is actually uneducated in their decisions, not because they want to be, not because they're trying to just make the wrong decision, but simply because things that seem uninteresting or risky may not appeal to them, even though they are what's better for the scientific community. So we argue that experimentation and risk is really what needs to happen, and that can only happen in the private sector. And we've shown you why the public sector hinders the private. So we argue that we are actually showing you what the private sector should be doing and what the public sector should be doing. And today we see a serious problem in which the two are not doing what their jobs are efficiently. And there is a problem in the status quo, and that the proposition is the only team who is actually trying to create a change and not remain complacent to the problems in today's society. So we urge you to propose. Thank you.
And I'll call upon the second speaker to continue the debate.
Yeah, just press start. All right. Okay. May I begin? Mr. Speaker, we believe that in the 21st century, technological development and advancement is crucial to society and progression, ladies and gentlemen. And we feel this is crucial to state development as they were advocating for, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we believe government should foot the bill and pay for space exploration. Now, ladies and gentlemen, $1.2 million, ladies and gentlemen, 48,000 people, and 11 herbs and spices, ladies and gentlemen. That's all we've heard from the proposition. They've thrown us the proposition. We've heard a lot of statistics and facts from them, but let's really analyze what they told us. They told us two things. One, that private funding is better, ladies and gentlemen, than public funding, and that secondly, money is better. That money should be better spent in other programs. I'll be dealing with this now. Let's deal with the latter of the arguments first. Money is better spent in other programs. Now, the proposition has painted us a grim picture of where space exploration is this evil monster that steals money from all other things. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think any government in the world arbitrarily just randomly picks, we're going to give this program money, we're going to give this program money, this amount of money. Ladies and gentlemen, we think they're working according to a system on how much they want to progress this year in terms of how many people they want to alleviate poverty, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of percentage-wise. But furthermore, they showed us no clear logical link as to how reducing the amount of money the space exploration will get will increase the amount of money these people will get. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, they fell into the problem-solution gap where they didn't clearly analyze all the factors that contribute to these things. For example, the attribution argument, ladies and gentlemen, they fail to take into consideration maladministration and corruption, ladies and gentlemen, as to why these people don't really get their food, ladies and gentlemen, as to why these people don't really derive these benefits. Sit down, man. But furthermore, they came up here and told us citizens want short-term benefits. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we say long-term benefits form part of what government wants to do, ladies and gentlemen, sustainable growth. And furthermore, we say, ladies and gentlemen, it's called gross government investment, ladies and gentlemen. Hence why government invests in infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen. Hence why government invests in its economy, so to ensure long-term benefits. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, they say citizens want short-term benefits. We say we're not really fine with that. But furthermore, they came up here and painted us this grim picture of how, ladies and gentlemen, there's an environmental crisis in China. And we say, yes, there is an environmental crisis in China. And how do we know there's an environmental crisis in China? And how do we know what caused that environmental crisis in China, ladies and gentlemen? We know because of space exploration. We know that there was a hole in the ozone layer. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Because we went outside into space and we saw that there was a hole, ladies and gentlemen. And that's how we developed technology such as the ozone cleaner, sit down, ma'am, which helps clean up carbon dioxide in the ozone. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, you see, I'll be moving on to the second point, this private funding. All right, so they came up here and told us that we want the private sector to do it better. Well, our argument to this is, ladies and gentlemen, when you have the private sector, you're dealing with whatever they find is this, intellectual property. We see problems like this have arisen with fracking with the company Shell, ladies and gentlemen, where the company Shell said, it's ours, we're not going to sell it to anyone, ladies and gentlemen, and we want to derive benefits. They failed to analyze the nature of a business, ladies and gentlemen. A business is there to make a profit. They don't really care about the people, and that's why we prioritize government over them, because government cares about the people. Quickly.
In our argument about competition, once these private entities are in fact making the products, then in competition they will have to decrease the prices and make it profitable and beneficial for the public.
Ma'am, please sit down. Ma'am, we challenge you to give us one example of where a private company has undertaken space exploration on its own. Ladies and gentlemen, you see that it's vastly expensive and they can't pull it off, ladies and gentlemen, and they failed dismally. And we see that, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we prefer the government. Now, sit down, sir. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've shown you that they failed to analyze the nature of a business and that a business is purely profit-driven, and that, ladies and gentlemen, this opens up ourselves for exploitation. Now, let's move on to our positive matter, ladies and gentlemen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we need to ask ourselves, space, scientific advancement and state welfare, ladies and gentlemen, are these two mutually exclusive, ladies and gentlemen? Do you have to have one or the other? If you're on side proposition, then you only have to have one or the other, ladies and gentlemen. But what if we told you you could have your cake and you could eat it? Let's look at some of the benefits we've derived from space exploration, ladies and gentlemen. We see that we've advanced our technology vastly. They came up with the GPS. We said, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we love the GPS. They came up with the laptop, ladies and gentlemen, satellites, ladies and gentlemen. We were able to make phone calls half a way around the world, sit down, sir, because of satellites in orbit, ladies and gentlemen. And we see that because of these, there's a fundamental need for space exploration. But sit down, ma'am. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we see that we've used space exploration to help boost our security with weapons advancements, ladies and gentlemen. We see that, ladies and gentlemen, we've been able to help protect our people. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the international relations aspect that comes with space exploration. We see that gone are those days where it was a Cold War, ladies and gentlemen, and people trying to one-up each other. We see that in today's age, we can have a conglomerate of countries coming together and saying, let's work together and try and get to Mars, ladies and gentlemen. Let's work together and trying to get to Pluto, ladies and gentlemen. And we see that it's that friendship that you don't get with private companies, ladies and gentlemen, and it's those international relationships that we would prioritize. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we see that with the technological advances that come with space exploration, this would be fundamental in third world countries because that's where technological advances is needed. And I'll give you an example of Japan, ladies and gentlemen. Japan had an initiative where they sent for 20 years their students to MIT, ladies and gentlemen, with the clothes that they'd come back and work in Japan, ladies and gentlemen. And look at them now. We see that when you prioritize scientific advancement and technological advancement, ladies and gentlemen, that benefits go all the way to the people, ladies and gentlemen, instead of just lining up rich at people's pockets, ladies and gentlemen, and that's the fundamental problem we have with the proposition. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we needed to look at in today's debate on which side served the people's needs better, ladies and gentlemen. You have a side that wants to help big companies get rich, ladies and gentlemen, and give them the means to which to exploit us, the people, ladies and gentlemen. And you have a side that says we prefer government to do it because government has the people's best interests at heart, ladies and gentlemen, because whatever we find in space, ladies and gentlemen, be it a new resources, natural resources, ladies and gentlemen, we think that we can manufacture these natural resources and create a product that we can sell, ladies and gentlemen. That's how people will be benefiting indirectly. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we see that should we run out of natural resources, ladies and gentlemen, on Earth, it's beneficial for us to have a plan B, ladies and gentlemen, where we can go mining for resources. And we see that, ladies and gentlemen, these potential benefits outweigh all these short-term benefits they spoke about, ladies and gentlemen. But we need my first speaker came up here and eloquently set the foundation for our team line, ladies and gentlemen, and they did nothing to this. The second speaker said she'd get to his speech and never really did, ladies and gentlemen. She just brushed it aside, and we think that this is poor strategy on their half. So, ladies and gentlemen, in today's debate, you've had a solid South African team that said we want government to foot the bill for space exploration, and you had an American team that left us with the hang case that says space exploration steals money from people, ladies and gentlemen. But ladies and gentlemen, without space exploration, they haven't shown us how these people will get this money. And for these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, in the words of the greatest man that ever lived, Buzz Lightyear, ladies and gentlemen, to infinity and beyond.
And I call upon the third government speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, in an era where there has been more innovation than ever before in terms of information, science, and technology, privatizing the space industry has the unique ability to revolutionize it. And that is what I will be talking to you in my third speech today. I will be presenting you with two major lines of analysis. First, I will be examining the propositions and opposition stance on the direct impacts of public versus private spending. And secondly, I will be talking to you about the indirect impacts of public versus private spending, entitlement programs, and where that money will be going to in my second issue today. So first, let us talk about the direct impacts of public versus private spending. Now, the first thing is, I want to point out how they haven't addressed the fundamental issue of the fluctuation in spending that hinders the ability of space missions. Here is why the status quo is wrong. There's a dependent relationship between the private and the public industry as it is right now. Ultimately, what goes on when space exploration missions are taking place in our society is that governments send people out into space in order to collect information. And then companies take that information in order to create their products, which ultimately end up benefiting the people. But the fact of the matter is that space exploration companies and private industries ultimately have the ability to both conduct the mission and create the products, which at the end of the day bring this new technology and bring the benefits to the people. Yes?
Still haven't addressed the fact that they're there to make a profit, and they make a profit by charging the highest price possible. Deal with that and how it affects the people.
Sir, we think that the fact that companies are driven to make a profit is a good thing because now they have a monetary incentive to make sure that their explorations are successful. As it is right now in the government, the researchers that conduct space research are paid and given their money regardless of whether the mission is successful or not. So we think that the monetary incentive of private companies actually gives them more reason to succeed. Secondly, they talk a lot about how private industry and the fact that they'll be monopolized will be a bad thing, but we think that by privatizing the space industry, that's what's ultimately going to create competition. And we think that the public involvement in the space industry has ultimately hindered the ability of more companies to develop, because we think that the fact that space exploration by governments is the thing that gives these companies the technology that they need to make their products, that actually holds them back. We've given you examples of when space exploration hasn't been successful by countries. We've given you examples of multiple scientific missions, as in the Arctic, as my second speaker talked to you about, where public funding didn't work, private did. And that's ultimately why they have an incentive to succeed. So ultimately, there's a dependent relationship between public and private industries, and ultimately, this leads to the crowding out. These private industries cannot develop, and they cannot take their role in the free market economy. Secondly, they bring up this idea about how only a handful of companies will be able to participate as they did in their point of information. But to this, we have two responses. Firstly, the privatization of space industries is relatively new. Companies are still developing. But secondly, as I just talked about, private companies, through competition, actually end up driving costs down. The more companies that are able to develop and create their own space exploration technology, the lower prices will be. This will lead to better technologies because companies will be competing against each other for the best technology that have the best impacts that benefit the people at the end of the day. Secondly, we think that they'll be more efficient because now companies will be in a race with each other in order to have the best products. We think that by privatizing the space industry, that is how we will get more benefits to the people. So we think that this competition and that this increased competition between companies and the profit-driven incentive are good things. Secondly, we recognize that there's a fundamental redundancy in the public and private support of space programs. We think that we've talked to you a lot about how the government is crowding out private investment. Companies don't have the ability right now to go up into space and conduct their own research and therefore develop their own technologies with the research that they conduct because the government is monopolizing the space industry, as I talked to you about up and down the bench today. Then they talk about how in the ozone layer in China. But at the end of the day, solving global warming isn't coming from governments. It's coming from companies that develop technologies which allow resources and create new energy, new forms of energy. That's how we solve global warming. That's how we solve all the issues environmentally in the issue today. It's not the government that's ultimately solving these issues. It's the companies. They're creating the technologies and they're the stimulus for change. That's the stance of side proposition in this debate. So ultimately, on the stance of direct impacts of private versus public funding, when you're dealing with the idea of space exploration, which does represent a giant step for man and mankind, we think that privatizing the industry is the only way to go. Why is that? There's no consistency in public funding. We've given you examples of both the Human Genome Project and with stem cell research, as well as with the NASA space program within the United States. We think that the public ultimately takes money in and out of these programs, depending on a variety of factors, political factors, economic factors. When politics affects the way that these missions are run during the time when the governments are in power, that ultimately affects the ability of these public programs to proceed. We think that privatizing the industry ultimately creates a more stable environment so that we can actually project for future technologies. Opposition has taken the stance of designing for the future, but we think that that argument falls on our side of the house. We don't think that these are consistent innovations when the government is pulling money in and pulling money out of space exploration, and that's a problem. That doesn't allow for efficient development of technology. Secondly, we think that the public investment hinders private investment in the space exploration program because the public is ultimately slow to adapt to change. We think that the fact that the United States government had a fleet of space shuttles and then didn't adapt them for 30 years shows that the fact that the public is unwilling to adopt a change. We think that the private industry, when there is more competition directly against other companies, that is what will drive them to adapt. Now, secondly, let us talk about the indirect impacts. We think that they talk a lot about the legitimacy of public funds, that they are intended to create a better situation for people. But we think that space exploration doesn't do that directly. We think that it's the companies that create technologies, that's what the people benefit from. So ultimately, we think that that argument falls on our side of the house. Secondly, if we discuss the role of both the government and of the private industry, we think that the private industry is the one that creates the beneficial products. That's their role. The role is to make money, and they do that by giving benefits that people want and that people will spend their money on. We think that the role of the government is to provide for their people, and we don't think that simply going out and collecting information is solving that problem. What's more is that we think the private industry has the resources and is better equipped to do so. We've given you multiple examples of private companies that have already been started. SpaceX, Mars 2, all of these companies that have already been starting and innovating in the past couple of years. We think that the role of the government is ultimately to provide for their people. Then they talk about how we haven't proven a link, that we haven't proven that just because we stop space exploration in the public sphere, that the money will go into entitlement programs. So we think we have. We think that we've shown you that the budget, that the difference between discretionary and compulsory spending already proves this link. But even if it doesn't, even if you think that somehow that the government money won't go directly into entitlement programs, we still think that the role of the government is not to collect information that businesses will ultimately end up using. So we think that even if you don't agree with this link, the government will actually spend it on other programs benefiting the people, even if it's not entitlement. So at the end of the day, it's the role of the government to take care of the people. That's our stance. We think that we've already shown you multiple benefits to entitlement programs. At the end of the day, countries should not be spending their money on space exploration programs and collecting information and technology when their people are starving. We talked to you about that up and down the bench. So at the end of the day, this debate comes down to the role of the government and the role of the private industry. We think that the role of government is not in collecting information for space technology. We think that's the role of the private industry. They are better equipped to do so, and that will ultimately bring out more benefits for the individual and for society. Thank you.
Let's hop on the third lap together, close face on his side.
I'd like to start my debate with two short stories, right? Let's see. Let's start with the first one. I walked down the street one day and I gave a beggar some money, hoping he'd get himself some bread or something to eat or do something productive with that money. I literally watched him walk into the shop right across the road, buy himself a pack of cigarettes, smoke it, and as he casually walked away smiling and laughing. The second story. In South Africa a couple of years ago, we realized that the educational system really wasn't going all too well. So what did we do? We pumped more money in that aspect. And what happened last year? A whole saga where basically an entire province didn't get its textbook. What's the moral of these two stories? Simple. If you throw money at something, it doesn't guarantee growth, it doesn't guarantee development, which is exactly the flaw side proposition in this debate haven't necessarily dealt with, but I'll be dealing with that further in my speech, right? Let's start off by attacking their entire team line in this debate, and then I'll move further on into the more specific rebuttals in this debate, yes. So with this in mind, ladies and gentlemen, let's see, what their team line was to prove to us is that by allocating the funds better, which we've seen throughout their speeches, is that by allocating the funds better, we'd actually be helping out our country, etc. We should prioritize the poor people and the poverty, etc., and all of that, ladies and gentlemen. What we actually see on side opposition is that A, it's already prioritized like that, ladies and gentlemen, and B, the space exploration is already part of the budget. They've already budgeted for the poverty. They've already budgeted for development, etc. So everything they're advocating for has already been budgeted for, ladies and gentlemen. And the problem that we have here is that they haven't necessarily shown us how throwing money in this direction, in the direction of the poverty and development, etc. How throwing money in that direction is going to guarantee its development, is going to guarantee less hungry people in the street. They haven't shown us that link, and because of that, we see that there's a problem in their entire team line. But before I move further on with exactly what they were debating, let's hear this point.
In no sense are we throwing money at these other places, but by allowing the private sector to take over space exploration, we are creating a plethora of more money to be put towards these sectors in improvement and having this option to be put towards these sectors.
So in nicer words, you're throwing money at them because you're cancelling out the space exploration, and what you're doing with that money is giving it to them. Okay, so you're not throwing them money, you're giving it to them, more casual. In any case, your point doesn't stand in any case, ladies, ma'am, because what we see is that, as I've already told you, everything is already prioritized, right? We've already prioritized for poverty. We've already thought about that as government when we set the budget for when we set the national budget in terms of compulsory and discretion funds, right? So we've already allocated all the funds properly, ladies and gentlemen. So the problem here isn't necessarily the lack of funds. The problem here, like we've already mentioned to you in my second speaker's speech, could also be mismanagement, could also be misuse of the funds themselves in terms of the funds that have already been allocated in that direction, right? So we don't necessarily blame space exploration for all the problems we have in society, such as poverty, etc., because those are universal. And in any case, those problems didn't necessarily stop or even slow down the space race from happening, right? So we don't necessarily think that your stance on this debate stands. But let's move on to what you're basically pressing for this entire debate, no, not taken so. Let's move on to what you're basically pressing for this entire debate. Is basically your whole point on detriments. How by advocating for the space project, we're going to be ignoring all the other problems we have, and we need people to see where their money is going physically, ladies and gentlemen. So let's see. This basically circulated throughout their entire first speaker's speech. It was all said in different words, but it all relates back to exactly the same thing, that we're ignoring every other problem in society. Firstly, they haven't shown us how all these problems are attributed solely to space exploration, which is why we should cancel space exploration, right? We all know, actually I'll come to you now. We all know space exploration isn't the only thing we have under discretionary funds, right? Which is why we don't think that it's necessary to cancel out space exploration specifically. What about all the other things under discretionary funds that we could cancel out in place of space exploration, right? How is it not their fault that all these problems in society exist? That's what we were talking about with the attribution argument. How do we attribute these problems to space exploration specifically, right? But before I move on further, let's hear the last point.
Sir, the opposition has talked about specific benefits of public funding to space exploration, including defense. We think that this example alone proves why they're wrong. More money for defense to the public only creates a space arms race, more problems for the future.
Let's see. We don't necessarily think that the allocation of money towards a space program is detrimental to society in the future. Contrary to that, we think it's actually beneficial to society in the future. Because, ladies and gentlemen, what we've noticed is that from the development of space exploration, we've had a whole load of fringe benefits which we already highlighted to you, such as the development of solar panels, such as satellites out in space for communication, etc. And also it's been helping us out in terms of geography, etc. So we can now actively predict natural hazards and disasters and all that, ladies and gentlemen. And if people know when they're about to get hit by a tsunami, we think it's actually more important that they know about this as opposed to them worrying about the next loaf of bread today. How about them worrying about what's happening in the future, ladies and gentlemen? We actually think that the man won't care whether or not he's hungry if another country is planning to bomb his country and we don't necessarily know that it's going to happen, because there's no way for us to monitor these people. We don't think this hungry man would care about his hunger in a state whereby a tsunami is about to hit him and he has no idea that it's coming. Why? Because there has been no space exploration, because there hasn't been this benefit there under. So we don't actually know about this, assuming we had never developed this, right, ladies and gentlemen? So actually see that space exploration is beneficial to us because it's given us critical things in today's world, right? So the entire stance on detriments in this case doesn't necessarily stand because A, they haven't shown us the causal link. They haven't shown us the causal link between space exploration and all the problems of society, and they haven't shown us how exactly throwing the money at these other prospects of society is going to help them get better. That's the problem we have with them in today's debate. So that basically deals with their entire notion that we're throwing the money the wrong way, right? Let's move on to the next thing they told us, is that privatization is a whole lot better. And under this, they told you that governments quickly stopped funding polar expeditions because they just lost interest. So now, let's look at the logic behind this, right? Government tried something new, they lost interest in it, so they stopped funding it. And that is essentially the problem they have with this particular example, and as well as with the logic behind it, right? That they tried something new, got bored, and stopped funding it, and then it failed. That's the problem side proposition has. Let's look at this very same logic and apply it to space exploration. All I'm going to do with this is all I'm going to do is substitute the word polar expedition with space exploration, right? And see how their new stance would actually help this out. We see that it would only perpetuate the problem. Why? Because we would try something new, space exploration, right? We would give it money, and eventually with them losing interest, and then it fails, obviously because we stop funding it. That's essentially the problem. That's essentially how their problem even perpetuates into space exploration. I'll take it from both of you. That's essentially how their problem perpetuates into both cases. Why? Because they're using the exact same logic. They quickly lose interest, they give up on it, and they stop pumping money, and then they act surprised as to why it failed, ladies and gentlemen. Which is why we feel it's actually important for governments to keep on funding space exploration, because the possible benefits we could get out of that outweigh all the possible detriments they could bring forth to us, right? So we've mentioned the attribution argument over and over again, so I don't feel the need to highlight that any further in terms of privatization. And then basically what they told us is that with government taking a part in space exploration, it actually hinders companies from developing, because basically government gets this big monopoly from that, ladies and gentlemen. And that's essentially the problem we have today. We already see, ladies and gentlemen, that companies can't start off without government's help in terms of space exploration, right? So that's where government is actually necessary in this case, ladies and gentlemen. So we see in actual fact that government is not only necessary in this, but actually helpful for space exploration in both cases, ladies and gentlemen. Not only developing their own space projects, but helping out the private sector where needed as well, ladies and gentlemen. So, and another question we'd like to ask them before I summarize our side's debate is that if companies are so much better, if the private sector is just so much better at running space exploration, why aren't they doing it since they're so well equipped, right? So with that in mind, let's quickly summarize what side opposition has told you in today's debate. We've shown you how the benefits of space exploration are so fundamental to today's society in the modern day, right? We've shown you how this technology is good for us in a sense that it's helped us with communication and the whole geography point and all that, ladies and gentlemen. We've shown you how scientific advance is actually very important to us, and that protection and security from other countries that might attack, it's actually good that we can monitor these people so we know when they're going to attack us, right? So we've shown you how in actual fact space exploration has actually kept us alive in this context, ladies and gentlemen. So with this in mind, I thank you for your time.
I call on the occupied speaker.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, why are countries like America and Japan richer than South Africa and Uganda? Richer than South Africa. One reason: investment versus spending like a baller, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, what we show you in today's debate, that investment is more important than spending money right now. Why? Because money is going to run out in the future. We're going to need the exploration, the things that we got from exploration in the future, ladies and gentlemen. So what did we say inside of the house? That the future is more important than today. That it is better for us to go hungry now, ladies and gentlemen, than to die of a disease that we don't know tomorrow. That we don't develop, ladies and gentlemen, as society and as the world, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to handle two issues in today's debate. The first issue is who should fit the bill, ladies and gentlemen, and pay for space exploration. The second one, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Does stopping space exploration actually solve the problem? And then I'll later on deal with the points that we brought as proposition that was ignored by side proposition. Dealing with those 2 points, I'll show you why we won those 2 points, and the ignorance of those of the point that we brought in side proposition actually make us win in today's debate. First question, who should fit the bill? As proposition, we told you, okay, first of all, government should fit the bill, ladies and gentlemen, right? We told you that it is better for government to fit the bill because it is legitimate for government to fit the bill. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Public interest. The interest, the government, the public does want the government to do this, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, public good. We showed you, ladies and gentlemen, that when it's in the government's hands, it will be used for everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in the country or in those countries will be able to use that good, and it is a guarantee, ladies and gentlemen. Thirdly, we told you, ladies and gentlemen, that from that we won't have a monopoly, ladies and gentlemen, of high prices and so forth. We showed you that it is legitimate. Furthermore, we showed you benefits, ladies and gentlemen, of which I actually analyze later from the government. What the proposition side told us, ladies and gentlemen, is that privatization is actually good because it is better and is more efficient than the government, ladies and gentlemen. What we said to that was, first of all, that's a lie, ladies and gentlemen. And we told you that government and businesses actually have a nature of being selfish, ladies and gentlemen. What will they do? They will form an oligopoly, ladies and gentlemen, and monopolize the industry. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Because they will be at it alone, and there will be no one checking them, ladies and gentlemen, because the governments are not in that industry anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We told you that prices will go high. We gave you an example, ladies and gentlemen, of fracking, showing you the nature of businesses, and because they want to make money, ladies and gentlemen, they will care about getting what they want, but they won't care about giving it to public good. And this debate was actually about public goods, ladies and gentlemen. Who will utilize public goods the best, and not who will get there first, ladies and gentlemen. We showed you that they will use public goods the best because they will spread it around the country and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. The proposition didn't prove that. They only proved that they will get there first, which wasn't important in today's debate. Does stopping the payment of space exploration actually solve the problem? No, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't. We have proven to you so many times, ladies and gentlemen. We told you that the proposition was like in their analysis to show the link of where and how it will solve that problem, ladies and gentlemen. They then proved to us that those countries that have space exploration programs are poor, ladies and gentlemen, and because of that analysis, this team actually falls in today's debate. So the first issue we won, ladies and gentlemen, because we showed you that it is legitimate for government to intervene, ladies and gentlemen, right? Secondly, we showed you the benefits from it. We showed you the flaws that come from the privatization, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we won that point. Secondly, they didn't prove their positive matter. That's why the position doesn't stand. We gave you 1 point, which was international relations. They didn't handle it, ladies and gentlemen. Because we have two issues standing and 1 point standing on our side, we have won on 3 different levels. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for making us win this debate.
that opposition today is not only allowing people to go hungry today, but also doing what is worst in the long term. And I will show you today by dividing this debate in terms of principles and pragmatics to show you why we are winning both of these issues. So first of all, let's talk about principle. Let's talk about the goal of government inside space exploration, the goal of the private sector. So the goal of the government, which has been fundamentally misunderstood by side opposition, is not to create products. The products are a spin-off of other things they are exploring, as they have talked about weapons, to make their international image better. So first of all, not only have we said over and over that this arms race will be created by putting a lot of money into weapon development and space, and this will actually take away more money from entitlements, but we have talked to you about how they are not efficient in terms of taking products and sending them to the consumer, because that is not their goal. Their goal is not to get products. That is secondary. That is coming off of spin-offs of their original goal. So what is the goal of the private sector? It is new technology, profit, and innovation, all of which the opposition has talked a lot about, but they have not shown you why the government is the best person to do it. We argue that the free market has proven over and over again that there will be more technology, lower prices, there will be better quality of products, and these will be expedited out to the public faster by giving the job of sending out products to the private sector. But let's move on to talking about pragmatics, and let's talk about this in three ways: in terms of the individual, in terms of how this affects corporations, and in terms of how this affects the government. So first of all, let's talk about the individual. So we see that these entitlement programs are really important, and the only thing that the opposition has said in response is that throwing money at it does not solve the problem. But first of all, we say that what we are doing is not throwing money at the problem. We are opening up resources to other places other than space exploration. And we're saying that because the government doesn't have a role in space exploration, that we are able to spend more money in places like entitlements. But furthermore, we argue that it is a lack of resources that is not allowing us to provide food aid, provide development aid. And we say that in the end, it is a lack of resources, and that providing more money will create some positive change. But furthermore, let's talk about private corporations. We say that the incentive is unique to the proposition side of this debate. We argue that because workers are paid based on success, because there is money involved, and because innovation is what the private sector is supposed to do, that the private sector is the best person to take over space exploration. We argue that they've argued that we will be crowded out because of monopolies. We argue if they really cared about monopolies, they would create a change, because today we see the biggest monopoly, and that monopoly is the government. At worst, on side proposition, there will be maybe one new monopoly, which is status quo. At best, you take all the impacts we have said, and those will all apply, about efficiency, about lowering the prices. And furthermore, we argue that while the government can regulate industry to stop monopolies, there is no regulation when the government is the monopoly. Now, and also in terms of private corporations, we argue that they will not lose interest because private corporations are working for profit. And they themselves have conceded this when they said that if they took Arctic exploration and put it into space in the same situation as space exploration, that there would simply be a loss of interest, and all of the program would just fail. So we say that because programs like NASA have failed, we see that that there is a loss of interest and inconsistency in government programs that would not happen in the private sector. But furthermore, we see that today, in terms of the government, we see that, well, if we do not want to essentially throw money at problems to make them better, you should vote for proposition, because all they are doing is throwing money at failed programs like NASA and thinking that by repeating the same thing over and over again, we will have different results. And this is simply untrue. We have seen it in the past, and by arguing for status quo, they have shown no difference about how this would be any different in the future. So for these reasons, we urge you to propose. Thank you.